Sometimes we hear of ghosts at sea, and the following account of a ghost on board HMS Asp, which was written by Captain Alldridge, Royal Navy, commander of that vessel, appeared in the Pembroke County Guardian, February 16th, 1901. My dear sir, I herewith readily comply with your request as far as I am able respecting the unaccountable apparition on board my ship. Call it ghost or what you will, still, I assure you, that which I am going to relate is what really did take place, and much as I was and am a skeptic in ghost stories, I must confess myself completely at a loss to account by natural causes for that which did actually occur. Many years having elapsed since I retired from active service, I am unable to recollect all the dates with exactness, but I will give them as far as I can remember them. In the year 1850, the Asp was given me by the Admiralty as a surveying vessel. On taking possession of her, the superintendent of the dockyard where she lay remarked to me, "Do you know, sir, your ship is said to be haunted, and I don't know if you will get any of the dockyard men to work on her." I, of course, smiled, and I said, "I don't care for ghosts, and dare say I shall get her all to lights fast enough." I engaged the shipwrights to do the necessary repairs to the vessel, but before they had been working in her a week, they came to me in a body and begged me to give the vessel up, as she was haunted and could never bring anything but ill luck. However, the vessel was at length repaired and arrived in safety in the River Dee, where she was to commence her labors. After my tea in the evening, I generally sat in my cabin and either read to myself or had an officer of mine, who is now master of the Magician, to read aloud to me. On such occasions we used frequently to be interrupted by strange noises, often such as would be caused by a drunken man or a person staggering about, which appeared to issue from the after or ladies' cabin. The two cabins were only separated from each other by the companion ladder. The doors faced each other, so that from my cabin I could see into the after one. There was no communication between either of them and the other parts of the ship, excepting by the companion ladder, which no one could ascend or descend without being seen from my cabin. The evening shortly after our arrival in the Dee, the officer I mentioned was reading to me in my cabin, when all at once his voice was drowned by a violent and prolonged noise in the aft cabin. Thinking it must be the steward, he called out, "Don't make such a noise, steward," and the noise ceased. When he began to read again, the noise also recommenced. "What are you doing, steward, making such a noise for?" he cried out, and taking the candle rushes into the next cabin. But he came back quicker than he went, saying there was nobody there. He recommenced reading and once more began the mysterious noise. I felt sure there was some drunken person there whom my officer had overlooked, and accordingly rose and looked myself, and to my very disagreeable surprise found the cabin empty. After this evening, the noises became very frequent, varying in kind and in degree. Sometimes it was as though the seats and lockers were being banged about. Sometimes it sounded as though decanters and tumblers were being clashed together. During these disturbances, the vessel was lying more than a mile offshore. One evening, I and the above-named officer went to drink tea at a friend's house at Queen's Ferry, near Chester, the vessel at the time being lashed to the lower stage opposite Church's Quay. We returned on board together about 10 p.m. While descending the companion ladder, I distinctly heard someone rush from the after cabin into the fore cabin. I stopped the officer who was behind me at the top of the ladder and whispered to him, "Stand still, I think I have caught the ghost." I then descended into my cabin, took my sword, which always hung over my bed, and placed it drawn in his hand, saying, "Now allow no one to pass you. If anyone attempts to escape, cut him down. I will stand the consequences." I then returned to the cabin, struck a light and searched everywhere, but nothing could I find to account for the noises I had heard, though I declare solemnly that never did I feel more certain of anything in my life than that I should find a man there. So there was nothing to be done but to repeat for the 100th time, "Well, it is the ghost again." Often when lying in my bed at night I heard noises close to me as though my drawers were being opened and shut, the top of my washing stand raised and banged down again, and a bed which stood on the opposite side of my cabin pulled about. While of an evening, I often heard, while sitting in my cabin, a noise as though a percussion cap was snapped close to my head. Also very often, and I say it with godly and reverential fear, I have been sensible of the presence of something invisible about me, and could have put my hand, so to say, on it, or the spot where I felt it was. And all this occurred, strange to say, without my feeling in the least alarmed or caring about it, except so far that I could not understand or account for what I felt and heard. One night, when the vessel was at anchor in Martin Roads, I was awoke by the quartermaster calling me and begging me to come on deck, as the lookout man had rushed to the lower deck, saying that a figure of a lady was standing on the paddle box pointing, with her finger to heaven. Feeling angry, I told him to send the lookout man on deck again and keep him there till daybreak. But in attempting to carry my orders into execution, the man went into violent convulsions, and the result was I had to go myself upon deck and remain there till morning. This apparition was often seen after this, and always as described, with her finger pointing towards heaven. One Sunday afternoon, while lying in the Haverford-West River opposite to Loreni, the crew being all on shore, and I being at church, my steward, the only man on board, whilst descending the companion ladder, was spoken to by an unseen voice. He immediately fell down with fright, and I found his appearance so altered that I really scarcely knew him. He begged to be allowed his discharge and to be landed as soon as possible, to which I felt obliged to consent, as he could not be persuaded to remain on board for the night. The story of the ship being haunted becoming known on shore, the clergyman of Loreni called on me one day and begged me to allow him to question the crew, which he accordingly did. He seemed very much impressed by what he heard. He seemed to view the matter in a serious light and said that his opinion was that some troubled spirit must be lingering about the vessel. During the years that I commanded the Asp, I lost many of my men who ran away on being refused their discharge, and a great many others I felt forced to let go, so great was their fear, one and all telling me the same tale, namely, that at night they saw the transparent figure of a lady pointing with her finger up to heaven. For many years I endeavored to ridicule the affair, as I was often put to considerable inconvenience by the loss of hands, but to no purpose. I believe that when the officers went out of the vessel after dark, none of the crew would have ventured into the cabin on any account. One night I was awoke from my sleep by a hand, to all sensations being placed on my leg outside the bedclothes. I lay still for a moment to satisfy myself of the truth of what I felt, and then grabbed at it, but caught nothing. I rang my bell for the quartermaster to come with his lantern, but found nothing. This occurred to me several times, but on one occasion, as I lay wide awake, a hand was placed on my forehead. If ever a man's hair stood on end, mine did then. I sprang clean out of bed. There was not a sound. Until then, I had never felt the least fear of the ghost, or whatever you like to call it. In fact, I had taken a kind of pleasure in listening to the various noises as I lay in bed. And sometimes when the noises were very loud, I would suddenly pull my bell for the lookout man and then listen attentively, if I could hear the sound of a footstep or attempt to escape. But there never was any, and I would hear the lookout man walk from his post to my cabin, when I would merely ask him some questions as to the wind and weather. At length in 1857, the vessel requiring repairs was ordered alongside the dockyard wall at Pembroke. The first night, the sentry stationed near the ship saw, as he afterwards declared, a lady mount the paddle box holding up her hand towards heaven. She then stepped on shore and came along the path towards him. When he brought his musket to the charge, who goes there? But the figure walked through the musket, upon which he dropped it and ran for the guardhouse. The next sentry saw all this take place and fired off his gun to alarm the guard. The figure then glided past a third sentry, who was placed near the ruins of Pater Old Church, and who watched her, or it, mount the top of a grave in the old churchyard, point with her finger to heaven, and then stand till she vanished from his sight. The sergeant of the guard came with rank and file to learn the tale, and the fright of the sentries all along the dockyard wall was so great that none would remain at their post unless they were doubled, which they were, as may be seen by the report of guard for that night. Singularly enough, since that, the ghost has never been heard of again on board the Asp, and I never heard the noises which before had so incessantly annoyed me. The only clue I could ever find to account for my vessel being haunted is as follows. Some years previously to my having her, the Asp had been engaged as a mail packet between Port Patrick and Donaghadee. After one of her trips, the passengers having all disembarked, the stewardess, on going into the ladies' cabin, found a beautiful girl with her throat cut lying in one of the sleeping berths, quite dead. How she came by her death no one could tell, and Though of course strict investigations were commenced, neither who she was or where she came from or anything about her was ever discovered. The circumstances gave rise to much talk, and the vessel was remanded by the authorities, and she was not again used until handed over to me for surveying service. Here ends my tale, which I have given in all truth. Much as I know one gets laughed at for believing in ghost stories, you are welcome to make what use you please with this true account of the apparition on board the Asp.